a kind of a social analysis or demographic analysis. So we look at who are the people that live here, what is a kind of a story or history of the urban development of that specific area, how does it connect to the rest of the city. But also then later we do make a kind of a survey or a mapping of the existing kind of the existing stakeholders, the public institutions or the cultural institutions that we think are relevant for working on that site. So on the first neighborhood, because kind of the first impact that we had was that the commercial spaces were all empty, we started by mapping those, by looking at what were the empty spaces, why were they empty, who were they, or what was the ownership of those spaces. And then later, what were the occupied, like commercial retail spaces, because we thought that they were important on the uses of public space. But then on the second neighborhood, because it's a social housing neighborhood, we looked at mainly what were the municipal agencies on the site, what were the nonprofit agency or nonprofit organizations that were already were already somehow working on that location. So I think that's kind of the base for then to start understanding what kind of engagement tools will work better on those locations. So for example, nowadays with COVID, it would be impossible to think of online engagement tools on the neighborhood that we are working right now, because when we did that survey in the beginning, when we analyzed the neighborhood, we understood that many people are older, so they will probably not be able to function so well with a computer. Many of them don't know how to read or to write. So then there will be a problem on maybe communicating through online tools. But that would have not happened on the first neighborhood that we were working on. So I think to look at analyzing the place in its terms, like in its physical terms, but also on its demographic and social terms. And it's an important part of then deciding what are the tools of engagement. And I think another strategy that we try to use is that we do try to understand how is the community organizing even before we reach to that place. So because we become like an external entity that just came up to the place, to that specific neighborhood. So we try to understand how are people organized at that moment, and we try to build in from there. So try to understand already what are the interests, what are the preoccupations, what are the challenges, what are the opportunities, but then how are people actually already taking care of those. So on the first neighborhood, there was not a community meetings, for example, of the residents of the neighborhood, but there was events happening on different shops. And so we started understanding that to build up on that and to see, to go through the energy that was already starting with the commercial spaces was something that we could build upon. But on this neighborhood where we are now, they did have a community group that didn't have many people, had mainly residents and the municipal agency that takes care of the buildings, of the management of those buildings, because they are public housing. So that then the tools of engagement had to do mainly with community meetings that in the beginning had very less people, but then eventually we started calling other stakeholders, calling other agencies that we thought were important to talk with those people. And then we build up from there. So I think how do we decide tools has to do with these two aspects, with looking at analyzing the site and really understanding the site, taking that time to do that. And then second, to try to build up from existing community organizations or existing interests that already happen on the site, and building up from there, then create different tools that can engage with those. I don't know if that makes sense. If you have any other comment on this, but I would say that this is
I think it was pretty clear for me how you decide on the selection process. So the second question talks about if you could give us some insight into some critical key points you learned while engaging with people.
Yeah,
That
okay.
would be great.
I had some, when I read your questions, I'm just going to say one more thing on the first question. When I read what Kriti sent me, I also remember, I also think that one important part of bringing people together is like to bring people together for work, for like thinking about public space, thinking about what kind of uses do people want, etc. But part of it is just to come together, like it's just to join people on some kind of like celebration or a party or a dinner or like whatever. So we also did that. Like we also like whenever we did, we asked people to help us think or to think with us about public space, about what could we build there. We had like a restricted budget, so what kind of things we could think to improve that one of the spaces. But then we also organized kind of a party in the end that inaugurated that space, and only that helps to bring people together and to like for the residents to be able to meet other residents and people that participated on the process, being able to tell others how was the process and hopefully bring more people to the process. So on that question of how to bring people together, I was thinking also that even that of just bringing people together, not for work, but just for like leisure and being able to meet other people, it's also really important, we feel, on the work that we have been developing. And yeah, we can also meet other people on this more like relaxed and formal way instead of always being asking people to work, you know, like sitting on community meetings and asking people to answer questions and to tell us what they think, and it's hard work anyway. So I think this moments of leisure also creates a point where people can actually create like stronger relationships. So I just wanted to say that on the previous one. So now you're asking about some key points that we may have learned on the, yeah, okay. So I wrote some things. So I thought about some things. So first of all, I think what I was saying before, to look at the specificities of the sites, I think it's really important. So to not come with or to try to adjust the kind of predefined ideas of how a community engagement should work and really try to understand the specificities of the location, not just like what you see and what you observe, but try to learn a bit from the history or the stories that happen around. So for example, on the neighborhood that we are working now, uh, most of the people that live now on the social housing, they came from informal settlements that were not just on that area, but other areas. And those people that came from the informal settlements came from different parts of Portugal, like from different rural areas, came to Lisbon, to the capital, to the urban areas, and settled on informal settlements. So they didn't have much in common. Like, of course, they have in common the same country, the same language, but they did came from different places and from different communities, and they were all in these informal settlements because they didn't have any other affordable solution to live. And then those informal settlements were just like knocked out, and people were placed on this neighborhoods. So you get like people from different places, people that migrated to Portugal after like we had a dictatorship that had colonies. After that, the colonies became independent. So there were a lot of people that came from the colonies to Portugal. So you have people from colonies, you have people from different places of Portugal, and they do not share a kind of a common background or a common history. So that help us to define the tools of engagement also, or at least to understand that background. Then we can start thinking about, like, sometimes we organize meetings where, imagine there's no Black people coming, or there's no I don't know it's in English, like gypsies, or yeah, something like a community like that used to be nomad, that used to be going from one place to other, and now it has settled in some areas. So then if you learn this history, then you get to understand that if in these community meetings there's only this kind of people, then we definitely need to go and like reach out to the other kind of communities that exist in this larger neighborhood. So really to learn about the place and to learn about its history, it's really important to be able to define engagement tools that are really reaching out to everyone and not just to a few. I think on our approach, mainly on this last neighborhood that we have been working on, we also understood that it becomes very important on this kind of participatory processes to find or to try to meet leaders of the community. So there are this kind of people that are already respected by the community, and whenever they speak, other people listen. So to be able to engage those and to build up that leadership, we also found that that's really important. Like we really think that sometimes like a successful project has to do with how many people are willing to give their time and to participate and to think about that project. And that comes up with, I think, identifying some like key people on the community and try to understand if they are willing to give their time to participate, and if not, try to understand why and build up that relation. Then like on the development of the project, I think we understood, and we made these mistakes on the way, but I think we understood that we need to manage expectations. So like when you come and you say, we're thinking about public space, then you have to really be clear about how much do you do, what is your role, what are the roles of the other people, what can they expect, what is a kind of timeline, right? So it happened many times that we would say, yeah, we want to think about this area, and we want to improve the quality of this specific public space. And different people will imagine different things and have different expectations of what they think a public space would be. And it can be like very different budgets even. So it feels important to really be able to manage those expectations and kind of together think about, like, be very clear and inform about how much money do we have, what kind of time do we have, what do we do and what we don't do, because we are also on the site, like we have a kind of a headquarters, a rented shop on that location. So people end up approaching us for not just thinking about public space, but about many other things. So it becomes important to say, like, okay, I can help as like a good neighbor, but for that you need to go and look for someone else, because we don't do that. Our role is this. So I feel that that's like an important and difficult like point that we have been learning on the way. I think that comes up also with being able to build trust. To like, people expect certain things from you, and you should be able to give some of those, like to show results, or to at least show that you are working on it. And that means to be able to inform, like I was saying, you know, like to be able to inform what is your role, what are their role, what are we expecting from them, what can they expect from us. So this kind of relationship and building a trust, it's also really important for the development of the project, because on many of these projects we are really try, like the project is supposed to be participatory, and that means we are working and then we are expecting that everyone on that neighborhood, or a big part of it, is actually working with us. And if there is no trust, then it's of course like impossible to work together. And because we end up being like the face of some decisions that the municipality does, or it's divided between like parish, and that is kind of the governance of the neighborhood, and then the governance of the city. There's different scales, and many times we think we think we as a group, like we are the residents, should do something, but then we are the ones that go and understand from the municipality that it's not possible, right? So then that has to be really informed, so that the trust on us is maintained, so that we can still work together. So I think that's also a really important point. And that also passes through give feedback loops, almost like any other client, that if they ask you something, if we ask something from them, then we need to inform what stage are we, what kind of results did we get from the last community meetings or other tools of engagement. So for example, we have been doing this. We have like a board where people can stick things that images of things of public activities on public space, and they can say the things that they like and the things that they don't like or they will not like to see on public space. And it's really important to then, after we do all that survey, to be able to show to everyone that these were the results. Like, I don't know, in our case, the most percentage of use of public space was to make a big dinner. And then like the third was to have a Zumba class or something like that. So it's important to be able to show the results of what we were doing and to keep people informed, I think, to also keep people engaged. And then, yeah, I think these are the main points. I also another thing is time. Like all this takes a lot of time, and we should like account for that time. That the participatory projects, I think, take a longer time than normally. At least in Portugal, the municipality would account for very less time, for very less investment. And it's something that definitely takes a time to build that relationship. It's very difficult to work on something together if you don't have the time to build that relationship and to be there on all the steps. So I think, yeah, I think another key point is to think about time. I think in the first project that we did, we thought that we would be there like for a year, looking at ground surfaces that were empty, proposing new strategies to reoccupy those spaces, to activate those spaces. And then we understood that the problem, like that we were seeing this much of all the things that we should have been looking at to think about that specific problem. So I think time is definitely another question.
Yeah. So I have a follow-up question, and like as you said, like there are municipality and government which are also linked to your decision making. So like I just want to know, like, is there any kind of influence or interference from their side which influence your design while thinking, or like which majorly change what you're thinking and they just ask you to do something else and then you have to do it? Like, has something ever happened, or like?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so the relation with this kind of governmental structures, it's always a bit complicated in the terms that you kind of need to, the projects kind of need to align different different wills from different stakeholders. So like the community will have a will, we will have some objective that may not be the same. The municipality have some political will, the parish will have some other political will, right? And we have to kind of try to align all of them and try to understand. I don't know, we do a lot the exercise of what does the head of the municipality wants? Can we somehow give him that so that the project can go ahead? And we start thinking like, okay, what he wants is to be elected. For him to be elected, then he will be thinking about like keeping the residents happy. That seemed like a normal way of seeing it, but also making sure that the residents know that it's because of him that this is being implemented. So then how can we communicate and how can we bring him to the side so that everyone knows that it's because of him? So like, I think it's important to really be able to almost like study the needs and the ambitions of all the stakeholders that are involved, so that you can try to align them. And then it's a problem also because of the time that these projects take, right? Because the municipal commissioner is in Portugal every 4 years, there's elections. And so on the last year, maybe he will not like want to do so many things because, I mean, this is a horrible way of thinking, but whatever he does on that year is going to be inaugurated on the year after, and maybe it's not himself that is going to inaugurate it, it's someone else. So, and that happened in Portugal for the last years, that there was a municipal commissioner that did a lot of stuff, and now everyone says like, oh, this municipality commissioner is really good. When like, you have to understand that these things take so long that it's obviously not because of him that all these things got implemented. So I think timing becomes another thing. Like many times, if it's in the end of the period of governance, then you may want to like wait a bit to go to start the project after. So I mean, all these things have to be on your mind, and it happened a lot. It happened not happen a lot, but it happened sometimes. For example, that the municipality, we got a project from the municipality to build a parklet, not just build a parklet, but to study the kind of framework that the parklet could have on the city of Lisbon, and think about what kind of things you should be looking at whenever you decide the locations of the parklet, the materials, etc. And we got paid to do a kind of pilot project that was permanent. So we did one that was not permanent, was built with like reused wood, etc. But then we applied for a program that the municipality had, and we had funding to think about the framework of that parklet to be built in other places of the city, and to actually build one that is more permanent. So maybe it's not exactly a parklet, but it's kind of on a curb extension that we were thinking, closer to the pedestrian sidewalk, pedestrian crossing, etc. And the municipality had funding for that and told us that they would fund us. But then, because sidewalks are on the jurisdiction of the parish, like of a smaller district of the neighborhood, and the parish commissioner didn't want this kind of parklet, because there was a problem with the parking on that location. Like there was less parking for all the residents that existed there. There was no underground parking, etc. So he didn't give the permission. So then you have like the municipality having some kind of strategies, but then the district having different strategies for that location, and they don't align. So then we got to do the framework, but we didn't have the possibility to build the parklet itself. So I think many times it's kind of normal that you start projects and then you have to readjust to the wills of the different governance, the different people that are in power, and that happens. But also it happens the opposite, that the municipality agrees, I'll tell a case that actually it was the municipality agreed with some specific project where the residents, I'll explain from the beginning. There's a number of vacant shops on this neighborhood that we are working on now. That, imagine, there are like 7 vacant shops, vacant ground floor spaces. And they said that they want to do a participatory project with the residents of the area. And we should create kind of a jury with people from the neighborhood, someone from the municipality, someone from the municipal agency that takes care of those buildings. And we should create a jury and think about what kind of uses should exist on those shops. That makes a lot of sense, because on this area there is a lot of vacant ground floor spaces. So for example, if you want to go and buy bread, that is something like essential in Portugal, you don't have a bakery to go and buy bread. So that would be like one of the first, I think, on the discussions that we had with the residents, that was kind of one of the basic uses that they would like to see on that location. So we agreed on being part of this kind of process. We thought that it makes sense. The residents thought it makes sense, and we started this process. And after like 3 months, the municipality came and said, okay, we thought already about this, and we want 4 of the ground floor spaces to be cultural entities. So we'll give it to like dance, theaters, etc. And only other 3 would be for like other kinds of uses, like groceries or services or whatever. So then we met with the residents, and we decided that then we don't want to be part of this, because they are already deciding what are the kind of framework for it. They are already deciding that cultural is as important as other kind of services. And that was kind of not what we agreed. We agreed on a participatory process. And that means that it's from the beginning, it's not just in the end that we get to decide. And when I say we, it's not we have shown, is we with the residents, right? Like all the community group that we have been involved with. So we said no, that we do not want to participate on this. If it's to choose between a group, they made kind of a selection already, and now we can only choose from a bit of the process, not actually make a participatory process. So I think it works on both ways. We also say no to certain things whenever, or the residents in this case say no to certain things when they see that it's something that is useful for the municipality, because they get to say that it was a participatory process because one member of the jury was a resident, but then it's not useful at all for the residents. So I think it becomes a two-way process. Sometimes things that we and the residents who think that will go ahead are not going ahead, but also some things that the municipality thought that we would participate in, and we end up saying no because it's not like we don't agree with certain logics of the process. So yeah, I think actually that's one of the difficult parts, is to align the needs and the ambitions of all these different stakeholders. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah. Yes.
So the next question, I guess you already answered a bit of it within this question, but it talked about, so in a participatory process, where you have people and other stakeholders, how do you decide and distinguish between the wants and the needs, and say as a designer that this is all I can incorporate from your feedback and this is how the design can be taken forward? Is there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think, at least on what we have been doing until now, I don't think we say like that is our ambition of doing this or doing that, or we don't want to do this or to not do that. But that is a part of like know-how as architects, that we will know how to inform those ambitions that the residents may have, or even the municipalities again. But we may be able to inform on like what's possible or not possible within one budget, or what's possible or not possible within the regulations of that site, no, or what's more feasible or not. If some people want a certain thing, we can kind of bring the imagination of this will work, but in the next 5 years it won't work, or like people will not maintain it, or many other questions that we do have the know-how and we do have the experience. And of course, people that are not architects, of them not been dealing with design and with urban design and architecture, may not have that know-how. So I think it's more like a discussion and a kind of study of the things that the residents say they would want, and then try to understand what's feasible and what's not feasible, mainly with the budget restrictions, with the site restrictions, with the regulation restrictions. But it's also to maybe like build up the imagination of certain things that can happen. So for example, like we were building a playground and we did some, this was when we did that, after we did the analysis, we did like a survey of what people would like to see or to have as uses or activities on their kind of pocket parks, because it's kind of divided in between different kind of squares. And one of the things was there was an existing playground, and many people raised the question that no one was using the playground anymore because it was not maintained. So then we started thinking about how the playground could be rebuilt. And like whatever people said is that they want exactly what is there. Like they want like the three kind of objects that existed there that are standardized and that you just buy it from a company and you build it there. So then I think part of our role is also to like bring a larger imagination and be able to show other case studies, to ask people if they will not like that space is used not just for kids but for other kinds of events, like if it was a more multifunctional space that kids could play, but also that there could be like a shaded area so that people can talk underneath or something like that. So to expand a bit the imaginations and not just say like this is possible, this is not possible, but building up from what people say, to be able to bring like other functions, other imaginations, to be able to showcase studies, to do renders if necessary, to see how people react and if it's possible to build up from there. So there was also another case where the budget was really low, and we end up in the end suggesting that maybe we could like paint games on the floors. People thought it was a good idea, but they never like in the beginning, they didn't talk about that. But then whenever we start looking at the playground, then some people that saw that other process with the painted things on the ground, with the games on the ground, that was like one of the first things that got suggested. So, I mean, we do have the know-how, we do have the experience, and we see projects like all our days on our profession, drawings and projects of case studies. So I think a lot is to also try to like broaden up a bit the imagination and push the limits of what is getting built already. So yeah, I hope I answered your question, but I think the kind of relation is not like the residents want this is, and then we say yes or no, but is to inform them, to make them think about this. I mean, imagine that someone comes and asks you about something that you never studied before, right? Like these people that we are working on, I don't think there's any architect actually on the residence. So they have never thought about these questions of public space, of what is design, etc. So it's part of our role, I think, also to question some basics, to explain, to show other case studies, to explain what are the possibilities, and then to build a conversation from there. And then with whatever it's discussed, then being able to push a bit the limits and to show kind of what is the scope of work in terms of in terms of its feasibility on the site, of the regulations, of the budget, etc. And of course, like all that we were talking before about the ambitions of the different like governance agencies, then that's also kind of, it also comes on the discussions where we try to, like, at least the commissioner of the parish, we do try to have him in some of the community meetings so that some things are discussed directly with him, and we understand what are the possibilities of building certain things, like seeing how much is he willing to go. I hope that answers.
Yes, it did. The next question asks like, how big of a role does materiality play in your project?
Okay. Yeah, that's an important but a difficult question, I think. So I think that on this specific neighborhood that we are working on, that is a social housing, so it's like public housing. The materials kind of like scream that it's public housing, that it's housing for the poor. You know, like you will never see this kind of typology of buildings, of colors, of like how the buildings are painted, but also the kind of poor materials and poor construction techniques that are used. So I think it's important to think that the materiality also has like a political and social connotation. Like you are able to understand that specific neighborhood is of social housing, like poor people live on that neighborhood, and you are able to see it just by this kind of like, I don't know, it's painted yellow and blue that nowhere else in the city that's allowed. Even like on the historical city that's not allowed, and many of the other more high-end buildings, housing typology do not use those colors. It's very like attached to a specific time where a lot of social housing was built, like of kind of a postmodernist time where a lot of social housing was built that used this kind of colors. So I think it's important to understand that. So I think on this specific project, I think the materialities have a lot to do with that. Like we try to bring a different kind of aesthetics to the buildings, and on the public spaces to be like a reference of good design, good detailing, good materials that don't need maintenance like every 2 years. That's what is happening nowadays. So like the municipality comes and does something with really poor construction, and then after 2 years it's again like it's spoiled and they do not maintain it, and then it's kind of put up on, you know, people that do not maintain their public space, when actually other sites are more maintained, like the municipality invests more in other sites and not on this one. So I think whenever we think about materiality, we think about trying to bring like a good materials and something that can be a reference and that can be that can become very similar to other parts of the city that are more rich more like fancy than this area that is very connotated with public housing and housing for the poor. So we really try to, whatever we do, and that's something that we were not doing on the previous project. That was already a historical area of the city that had both like people that maybe had less affordability, but also people that could afford a lot of could afford high-end buildings. And we were not so careful with the materials that we used. Like, it was fine to use recyclable wood, for example, in the sense that it was not permanent, and it didn't need to be permanent because we were just testing some stuff. But on this, we find that it's very important that whatever we do it very well, and we do it with materials that can last for long without being maintained or with requiring less maintenance. But we also try to use whatever it's like the local skills. So we feel that it's important that it's not just that we feel that it's important, but it's kind of given that people that sense ownership of their place, of the place where they live and the places that they use on public space, that those spaces will probably be more maintained and will be more taken care of. So if people participate on all the process, then they acquire that ownership and that proudness of that location, that probably those spaces will be more used and they will be more taken care of. So we try to also use like skills that are available on the site, or people that are willing to help. For example, there's a person that is really willing to help us all the time with all the projects that we're doing. He's really eager to participate, and he knows how to work with metal very well. And again, it's not a compromise on the quality of things. He really knows how to do it very well. So then we tend to use this kind of skills that are existing on site to kind of be able to invest on that community, even on whatever we do. It's kind of reinvested on the community. So yeah, so we kind of have that also, that we try to use the local skills. And recently we have been trying to look at like sustainability of materials. Most of the things that are done on furniture, on public space are, at least in Lisbon, many things are woods or concrete. And we have been looking now at like new techniques of recycling plastic, of actually like make the plastic into small pieces and then melt it and mold it to other kinds of urban furniture. And we have been talking with different companies now that do something that we don't like so much. That is, they do this kind of plastic, reusing plastic and molding it, but imitating wood. So they do put a brown pigment on it, and they do kind of this like beams of wood. So it imitates wood, so it looks like wood, but then you touch it and it's plastic. So it's a very weird thing. So we have been talking with this kind of companies and see if they would be willing to kind of like use the logics of the plastic, because you melt the plastic, so then you could mold it to very different kinds of objects and forms. It doesn't have to be the logic of the wood, obviously. So then we have been talking with this kind of companies to see if they will be willing to kind of experiment with us, because all the things that we use on public space have to be certified by the municipality. Like, it has to be following some standards so that no one get hurt and things don't get spoiled easily, etc. So we are now looking at that, because it makes sense also because on that specific neighborhood there is very less people recycling, so compared to other parts of the neighborhood. So we thought that we could try to think about like showing people that with all that
Like, after a point when people started using the spaces which you have provided or designed, so like do you leave, and like, because then they start using in a different way what you haven't thought about, and so do you leave any flexibility in that, like or you can like you can change in future, like after a point of time, that you can change according to what they are using it now, or is it just up to them, like they can do whatever they want, they feel like in the space? Yeah.
Yeah, I think we are not worried at all that people don't use things as we expected. Like it's
Yeah.
completely fine, and we think that that's the vitality of a public space, that it gets transformed according to what people need on those moments, right? And those, hopefully the residents will change, because that's house for people that cannot afford. So hopefully those people will end up being able to afford housing and can use it as a space for themselves. Can you say here only children play, then that's restricting the kind of uses that can happen. And I mean, we brought up the idea of maybe sure if I'm understanding, but I'll try to say something like this. uh, Public space and many other kinds of like design that we are thinking are not supposed, like we're not supposed to think, in many cases I think we are not supposed to think about absolute definitions, right? Like absolute designs that will never change. I think it's important to think about like things that are not permanent, because the problems are not permanent, no? Like the problems, the needs, the ambitions of people will keep changing. And sometimes specific places can be adapted, but also like I think it's important to think that they have to be flexible so that they can suffer changes also throughout. And it's not like an absolute project that you design this and it will never be changed. That's why, I mean, the city keeps changing, right? Like the city keeps upgrading itself, and whenever the community changes, then they will have, I mean, even if the community is the same, but we grow and we have different needs and we have different ambitions. So then there will be different spaces that will fulfill those needs and those ambitions at a specific time. And I think that's a beautiful thing of living in a city, is that you have like you have such a big variety of kind of public spaces, right? Like if you don't want to, if you are tired of going to a garden, hopefully you can move on to another one and start seeing other kinds of people and other kinds of services and other kinds of uses. And maybe that part that used to go and now you don't like, maybe it will speak to other people that before it didn't and now it does, right? So I think to think about like an absolute design doesn't help. That I think the city evolves and it has like overlaid different kinds of designs and different kinds of logics and different kinds of uses. So I think it's important to think about that. But also I think with what you're saying, like imagine that we design something and then we see that it's not working, like it's not being used as we thought, or it's not even being used, right? So then in some projects, and we hope that we can do that with many, we do kind of an impact evaluation. That's something that it's kind of more architects are doing nowadays, that you go and see the project after 1 year, after 3 years, after 5 years, and you may not change anything, but at least you learned from what happened, and you see like how people are using it, if the materials are still in good condition or not, so that you can learn from other projects. But there are cases where, for example, on the parklet that we built in the beginning, it's the parklet was like it was a new thing. We have seen it before, but it was a new thing. And we were like, we were like, we were like, sitting there. So like in the morning we would go, we would have lunch there, we'll sit, like get some beers, have it in the afternoon there. And then people started understanding like, okay, you can use this space. This is for people, like general people to sit. It's not for like the coffee across the street to be able to serve food here or something like that. So I think that sometimes in public space, you also need to kind of activate the place, like, or maybe just needed more time, right? Like we don't know, we didn't have the time to see it, but we just tried to like think about things that could actually activate that space. But I think to think also about like seeing the place, seeing what you built with the residents, and then thinking on how can it be a bit more welcoming, how can people like feel that it's their own. Sometimes it also helps to think about activation of those places, right? So on the parklet we did this, we just sat around, and then we didn't have to sit anymore because people were already using it. On this neighborhood that we did with the games, we did like an inauguration where we invited some people to give classes or to bring up traditional games that like the older generation knew and the younger generation didn't know, so then they could share this kind of more traditional games that used to be played on the street. So then I think activation also plays a role, and we try to do that, like to think about the design of space, but also how can it be activated, and those are like I was saying, we did this survey where we asked people what they wanted on the public space, and the majority of people said that they want to have a big dinner with the other residents. So then how do you think about that? Like, you are not going to design a big table where everyone is going to be able to do a dinner, but then it's not going to be able to use it for other things, right? So then you think about other strategies where you can do an activation where there's actually a big dinner and see how people like if people actually like to sit on one table, or if they would like to sit in groups, and then think about the design after that. But I think it also passes through think about users and activation of those spaces to inform the design, or after the design to kind of understand how do people feel more welcome to use it after this kind of activation moments.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so that's all from our side. Most of the questions we have asked. Yeah.
I want to ask you something then. This is like our experience in Portugal, of course, and you have been working on something now in India and in Ahmedabad that has a completely different context. So did you did you think about these questions in relation to yours? Like, do you think that this helps somehow? There are some similarities on this idea of like design and activation, of flexibility, but also on what you were asking me before about kind of the interests in the investment of the municipality and other government agencies on the kind of projects that you are working on. Can I ask that also? Or?
Of course. Yeah, please.
You think that some things were relevant, or it's just such a different context that many of these things don't apply?
I think the part where you talked about incorporating the politicians into the project and giving them an image to come in front of the people, I think that is used in one of the street designs in Pune, and that has worked. So I could say that politicians are same regardless of the place.
Yeah.
I guess that's
Yeah.
something you relate to.
Yeah, true. I think that case in Pune, I've seen many times, like, I don't know if the politicians speak about it like that, but on some of the articles, it comes up like, it's similar to other projects outside of India. It follows the sustainable goals of the UN, no, of the United Nations. Things that like, you kind of legitimize a certain process because you have other parameters of comparison. And I think that we also think about that a lot. Like, how can this kind of look good to a politician to say, like, we built this, it's the first project like that. Imagine, that's such a big thing for a politician, no? And all those like small things matter whenever you are actually trying to put a project forward. I wish it mattered less, but it does. What else?
So like in my semester 3, so we were dealing with migrant housing, and like we propose, like I propose in my design that we'll provide open spaces for the people to gather because they don't have. So like later I realized, like later faculty also told me, like if you'll provide them more open spaces, they will eventually invade that space and they will include in their own housing. So they will no longer have open spaces. So it's important to think wisely, like where you have to provide open spaces, and like so that they don't encroach upon them. Yeah. Yeah. So
I think it's also, I think those are like things that you can question on actually. How much should people not encroach? Like if there's such a small house, then shouldn't actually be like, there are many like site and services or other kinds of projects that do think about not encroachment in the sense of like providing public space and then people encroach on the public space, but in being able to increment it to extend their houses. But yeah, I think that's a good point on thinking on kind of what are the logics that you have seen now, so that whenever you design, you can think about like kind of predict a bit on what can happen to those spaces later.
yeah.
What happens on ours, on this neighborhood that we are working now, that is completely different from the previous one, is that there is a lot of public space, but it's very badly qualified. Like it has no quality. So then people do not use it. Even if there is like the amount is there, there is public space. There are squares that are completely pedestrian that have no access to cars. So this is to say that they don't work as parking, because that also happens a lot in Portugal. But then people don't use it because they don't have quality, or because they are not maintained, or because they are not so visible, or because they are too close to the kind of neighbor's window. So there is all this kind of not thought about the design of public space, and then makes it just not, people just don't use it. And the houses of those social housing are actually small. So there are many people that come that I think no, they say that they wish they could just like come and sit outside to talk with a friend. But then I don't know, the sitting areas are just too high and uncomfortable, or they are just right next to someone's window. So then it becomes uncomfortable. The space is there, but if it's not well designed, then it's the same as not being there. Okay.
It's okay. This is usually how they are.
No more answers.
Very shy, but it's okay.
If anybody else wants to say something,
Questions?
thoughts, something that came to your mind after listening to all of this.
I'll say one thing. I think that one thing that maybe, I don't know if it's an advantage or a disadvantage, but it's definitely different from like the Indian context from the Portuguese context in this case, is that the Portuguese context has a very like fixed and rigid system within that you can build this kind of projects from inside of that system. So it's like, if you want to paint a wall, you need to ask for permission for at least like 2 different agencies. And if you do something like that, you may get a fine for because you painted a wall, right? So there is a very like, there's a very rigid system of what you can do and not do. And at the moment, participatory projects are kind of not part of the picture. The municipality wants to say it's participatory, but they actually are still not accounting for it. So if you get selected to do a public space project, you get the time and the money to do it without participatory processes, because it obviously takes more time. But it's obviously then much more aligned with what people need, and it will definitely stay more maintained. It will bring like social cohesion to the people, etc. But it's just not inside of like the structure that is set for thinking about like for thinking about the urban environment, but then to implement projects on that, or there's like a very specific way that the municipality can hire someone, so it has to be by like public competitions that only specific people or specific offices that have an amount of experience or an amount of number of people working, etc., that can participate on these competitions. So it's very difficult to like go the extra mile, like do the extra step inside of such a rigid system, or there is not much space to experiment things, to like, even if you want to put music on a square in Portugal, like to just bring your, I don't know, your speaker and put it, you're supposed to ask for a permission of noise, right? So that like everything is regulated, and to do the extra mile becomes like a bit difficult. You have to go through so much work to do like the extra thing that it's easy to give up. And I think that in India, that's not an issue, I guess. Like in Ahmedabad, you can actually just come and build and change and paint and whatever. It's obviously more difficult to have the, like you don't, maybe you cannot capture the support of the municipality. So maybe like whatever you do, maybe it's not so permanent. It's very like, it just takes some, I don't know, some days, some weeks, some months until someone comes and takes it out or something like that. But there is that kind of freedom to experiment, and you have that maybe more that opportunity of not being on such a, I guess it's an advantage and a disadvantage, because there's not this kind of system that thinks about public space and urban development. You have more freedom to experiment things and to kind of make a point on how necessary are certain things. But then it becomes difficult to have the support of the municipality and to think about the city as like larger strategies, right? Like to think about urban development as a whole and not just a multitude of different projects that different people implement on the city. But definitely that's very different.
I think in India, once you have the money, it's very easy.
Yeah.
Get the money here from the government or other resources is very difficult. And I think that's the biggest struggle here compared to other places, I feel. Like there is no place that you can go and say, listen, I want to do this in my neighborhood. I mean, there is, but it's so convoluted that you will never figure it out.
Yeah, true. Yeah, I think because Portugal is in Europe and there are some countries that are a bit more advanced in the terms of thinking about participatory processes in Europe, then I think Portugal is also trying to go like on that wave of thinking that participatory projects are important, but then it's just still very superficial. But at least there is like money that is invested that comes from European funds at the moment, but there's money being invested in kind of local development and innovation projects. So this word innovation now is everywhere in the projects in Portugal that you have to, but it seems smart because they are giving money to companies or associations or like nonprofit or like different organizations to do something and to prove that that works on behalf of the city, and that the city will have to spend less money in the future because it's doing like things well and by innovating on these different projects. And I think that's smart, that's smart from the city because they are able to improve their systems, to show that they are doing work, to involve people that eventually are people that vote. So all those things seem to be like being discussed right now, mainly because it's being talked about in Europe, and European funds are being applied to that. But here, I agree, logics are very different.
Okay, so I think we can wrap the session up. Thank you, Mariana, so very much for taking the time out and being extremely articulate and giving the pointers in a way that can be applied very much so into their own projects right now, because the next phase is precisely where they have to start thinking about how do you implement these projects and how do you get them built. So I think that was very, very appropriate the way that you put everything together. Thank you so much.
And I think it was super insightful the way that you showed us how you act and you think in the different levels of these participatory processes, especially from the perspective that this whole notion that if the city evolves, the problems evolves, and so the solutions need to keep evolving. And from that notion, I think it's very useful to think the way by which you sort of connect design with participation and different agencies and so on and so forth. I think it's very helpful. It gives us a lot of tools to think on for their next step. So yeah, I think it was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Take care. Thanks.
Have
Have a
Bye.
nice evening.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. You too.
Akash.